Good evening, and welcome to the third program of Black Awareness Week 73. Before I introduce this evening's speaker, I'd like to remind you that we have some other programs going on this week. Tonight at 9:30, Mr. Vasquez, I think I'm right, will be at the Black Cultural Center. And tomorrow morning, or rather tomorrow at 12:10 in the gallery, Chris Ikediabi, Pan-African Student Organization, will be giving a speech. And at 2:30 to 4 p.m. in the gallery, a student workshop with Fred Kawasi Hayford of Ghana. And at 7 p.m. in the gallery, an African diplomat, that's Fred Hayford, will be giving a speech. And at 8:30 p.m., there will be a reception for him at the Black Cultural Center, and you're all invited to attend. Well, this afternoon, I have the honor of introducing Richard Vasquez. I think I'm right in pronouncing the name. I don't know for sure. And he's written a novel called Chicano, and here's a copy of it. I guess you can pick it up at the bookstore tomorrow. They gave me a little piece of paper here, and I'm supposed to read from it. I'm not a very good reader, but I won't bother you with that. Richard Vasquez is the author of Chicano, a novel recently published by Doubleday, a social document of ethnic soul and heritage. To many Americans, a new word has appeared. The whole race of people has become visible for the first time. Richard Vasquez, himself a Chicano, has the honor of having written the first Chicano novel. Beyond the lives of his characters, his own life holds special meaning for the Mexican American in his lecture audiences. Up from the barracks, literally disadvantaged and handicaps of poverty, large family and circumstances, he has been through it all, city and country alike, farm worker, grape picker, day laborer, construction helper, cab driver, etc., the whole route. Turning to California's junior college system for educational bootstrap assistance, he found that it was possible for some of the barriers, at least, to be overcome, and writing became his vocation. Before the novel, which has rapidly become a popular selling book, Richard Vasquez has made an intensive and detailed study of the great neglected race of Mexican American people. Based on the research of those studies, he published a large number of newspaper and magazine articles on various aspects of Chicano history and culture. With his gift of heart, humor, and devoted energy, Richard Vasquez comes forth as one of the new breed of leaders of his people. Recently, he received appointment as Chicano correspondent for the LA Times, one of the largest newspapers of the United States. The topic of his speech will be Chicano history and culture. So that I won't mess it up any further, Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you again, Albert. Is this thing working? Is it supposed to work? Well. There we go. Can everybody hear? All righty. Well, being on your campus today is, as I talked to many people, well, not many, but some, and it's quite an experience. You have a very unique campus here. I was absolutely astounded when I was told that out of 20,000 students here, you have 160 blacks and 3 Chicanos, and you can't find the Chicanos. But this, I've never been in a school that had reflected that ethnic distribution before, and so I'm kind of a little bit at a loss. But I think I can make up for it. One thing about when I talk, if there are any questions at any point, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll stop and go into it, because I find that that's one of the best ways to get dialogue going, and that's what I like, is to let you make as much use of me as you possibly can, because not that I'm someone that has a tremendous amount to offer, but I have an awful lot of experience in the field of, I guess, what would call sociology. And so anybody, please feel free to raise your hand. Right, at the present time, I was telling some of the people I met today, I'm editor of a black newspaper, and it's black in as much as the area where I live is about, I guess about 80% black, and the rest is more or less minority. And so I've been editor of that off and on for some years. Every time the paper gets broke and can't afford an editor, well, I volunteer to go and help out. First, I'll tell you a little bit about how I got started and winding up where I wound up, for better or worse. And I want to tell you that only because it's relevant to what I have attempted to do. It was about 15 years ago that I quit construction work and decided I was going to become a reporter. And I went to work after, I worked on a daily newspaper of medium size in the suburbs of Los Angeles. And one day the editor called me up to his desk and he said, there was a name of a street, which wouldn't mean much to you. In California, most people are aware of a little Spanish, but the name of the street happened to be, as I recall, it was Las Tres Viejas, which means the three, well, it can be loosely translated as the three witches or the three old hags or something. And the editor said, "What does that mean?" And so I told him much as I knew about it then, and he said, "Why don't you find out why it's called that and write a little story on it, because the people that live on that street, you know, it would be interesting. Everybody knows that." So I did. I found a very interesting little story about how in the old days the horses would go to a certain place and they wouldn't go any farther, and you'd have to beat them to make them go. And I don't know much about horses, but anyway, that's the way the story went. And so the legend grew up that there were three invisible witches that were spooking the horses. So then, of course, I went to a veterinarian and I said, "Is this possible?" And he told me, yes, it was possible, that horses are very sensitive when they feel something hollow, and if there's an underground stream or something, a horse can sense it and he doesn't want to go. Because of his great weight, he might break through. That's all irrelevant. But anyway, this started me on a research field, in the research field of what today we call Chicano history, and I found out some absolutely amazing things. The black people here, and those of you who are acquainted with black studies will agree with me that when you have all white Anglos writing a certain history of a people, it comes out very, very different than it actually happened. And I found this to be the case. In all the books I read, and we have some great facilities around the Los Angeles area, there were no books by people of Mexican descent on what had happened. Now, I couldn't believe that nobody had ever written them. They just were not available. And white America seems to, for many years, have had that problem, that the only books that find their way onto the shelves are those that tell it the way white America likes to think about it. You know, we have all the books about Manifest Destiny, which really translates as Kill the Indians and the Mexicans, because at that time America was expanding westward and seized the southwest part of what's now the United States, from Mexico, in an act which all historians agree, was an act of pure aggression, with absolutely no excuse except that we wanted to kill somebody and take their land away. And I found all this out that had been carefully fed to us in the school books, and that all wasn't true what I had read. For instance, as you know, Mexicans have a reputation for being lazy, and well, the blacks don't get away there either. They got that reputation too, but I think we got them beat a little bit. And one book actually said the reason that General Santa Anna was defeated after the Alamo by the American Army that the Americans, with all their Yankee shrewdness, knew that Mexicans always take a siesta at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so they attacked at 1:15 and caught them all asleep. That's how they beat the Mexican army. See? Well, actually, this actually went into textbooks, and a lot of people believe that. And of course, nothing was, I won't say nothing was farther from the truth, but it just was another example of what was happening. So anyway, I decided that, well, there wasn't a book that told how it was like, and perhaps I ought to do it. And it's a pretty lonesome work when you start to write a novel such as this here, and you think, and I'd never written a novel. I'd only been a reporter for, well, when I started the book, about 8 years or so. There was no book I could go to and see how so-and-so did it or how so-and-so. I went to the library, and they said, I asked, you know, what do you have on Mexican-American people that were here as a result of having been here before the war, which is what many of us are. Not most of us, but many of us are. Then, of course, the librarian said, oh, John Steinbeck did a marvelous job in Tortilla Flat. Have any of you read Tortilla Flat? I think most people have. In Tortilla Flat, the way he painted the Chicano, he called them paisanos, which is a word we never used. But he just painted a picture of the paisanos, as he called them, Chicanos, as guys who, boy, they loved to drink, they loved to get out of work, and they loved to chase women, and that's all they did. And Steinbeck did a tremendous amount of damage with his portrayal of the Mexican-American people. Now, this wasn't entirely his fault, because he was, in turn, was raised in a racist society that taught him that's how we are. And so naturally, he came along with his great talent, and nobody had written much about this subject at all, and so he filled a void there, and he made some marvelous characters, and at the expense of many of us, and it reinforced white America's idea, and it, more important than anything, it reinforced white America's idea of superiority. The old provincialism that America has, we've been so isolated from the rest of the world that white America has really gotten to think that they're superior. And recently, since I've sold this book, I got one pretty big royalty check, and I went to Europe, and I visited 13 different countries in Europe. And believe me, I've really got my eyes open. I think that, well, everybody ought to spend 2 months in Europe. You know, why don't you go do it? And because it really opens your eyes as to how provincial and how smug and just, I can't really think of a word except to say non-cosmopolitan American people are. Now, I don't have to tell you that the people in Iowa kind of have a reputation for being hicks on the sticks, which I know is not true. I happen to have been raised kind of with a family of people from Iowa. They were from Winterset, Iowa. I wonder if anyone ever heard of Winterset, Iowa. And, and so I knew people from Iowa. But nonetheless, people from Iowa are far removed from the problems of reality. And in the same way that I think most people from the Midwest, and when I say Iowa, I mean the Midwest in general, in the same way, America is far removed from the problems of the world and can only see problems of the world through her own experiences. Now, one of the first things I noticed about Europe was all the customs, such as the siesta, such as living, how do I want to say it? Americans work to live, Americans live to work, and the rest of the world works to live, that sort of thing. The problem of how the police relate to the community, the problem of how business is conducted, all these things America attributed to Mexico. And none of this is really Mexican at all. It is European, and it is the way the rest of the world looks at things. And America has become so hung up on her own ways that, that unless a thing is carried out in the way that we have gotten to see it, then we have a tendency to call it some foreign thing or some bad influence and say this isn't truly America. And I was just tremendously made aware of how things are. What really, I was very much ashamed of some of the Americans I saw. I hope you don't think I'm speaking anti-American, because I have a lot of good things to say about Americans too. But I was very much ashamed of the way some Americans act when they're abroad. And they act that way because when they're unsure of themselves and a little embarrassed, they become aggressive. And the reason they're unsure of themselves and a little embarrassed is because Americans don't travel like the rest of the world does. And anywhere in Europe and France and Italy and Germany, it's quite common to find many people walking the streets that speak 3 or 4 languages and have come in close contact with people from other countries. And here, this isn't the case. So consequently, America is one of the most disadvantaged nations in the world. However, let's get back to what my subject is supposed to be, which is Chicano history. I don't know if you're aware of it, but California had for many, many years a great shortage of teachers. And the few times I've started to mention this today, people start nodding before I get to what I'm going to say, because they know what I'm going to say. And this shortage has been filled to a large extent by teachers from this part of the country. They come to California and they're scholastically very highly qualified. There are fine schools here. But California has tremendous minority problems. Now this, I can tell from the vibes I'm getting from the audience here, you're so far, the people in this state are so far removed from what real problems are that it doesn't even get across to you, you know. It's sort of like people trying to tell you what it's like to have your city bombed off the face of the map. We can't understand that. It's happened to every other nation in the world, but it's never happened to this country. We just, as we say, yeah, it must be terrible to be bombed, and that's it. And this is kind of the feeling I get when I say that the rest of the country, a great deal of the country, has real problems, minority problems. And that doesn't mean that there's a bunch of blacks and Mexicans that just can't quite make it. That's not what I mean. What I mean when I say we have real problems is that this nation, unless something is done about it, is going to be torn completely apart. And when I say torn completely apart, I mean a police state emerging, and it is not at all far-fetched to say that you'll see barbed wire concentration camps, because the minority people in this country have latched on to part of the American dream, they were told. Now, they were supposed to believe part of the dream and say, yes, that's true, but it doesn't apply to me. They were supposed to do that, but they didn't do it. And they're going to want a piece of the pie, too. And as these people, the minority people, become a threat to the white establishment, the buffers that the white establishment places between itself and the ugly things it doesn't want to see, namely the police, the state militia, and the National Guard, and the Army, these things will intervene and settle the problem by force. And you know they're not going to put all the white people in concentration camps. You're pretty sure of that. And perhaps what I'm saying is frightening and far-fetched, but I wouldn't have believed this 5 years ago, and I was talking to groups 5 years ago. But today I can say, yes, we are going to, this country is going to be literally torn apart, because we've arrived at social plateaus so fast, such new plateaus. We've arrived there so fast and gone on and passed them up before we even settle those other problems. We've got new ones. There's no place in the world where what's happened racially has happened as it has here. It hasn't happened anywhere in the world. And we've created a people, we've created groups of people, primarily the Mexican American and the black, who do not fit into our society and who are not going to fit into our society. This doesn't mean, this is of course, this is a generalization, and you're in danger whenever you generalize. But there are large groups of these people who are unsuitable, is about the only way to put it, to move into the American mainstream. They cannot do it A good example is where I live. We have, in Pasadena, we have a tremendous race problem. And we're busing kids all over town, you know, and actually they've bused everybody in one area clear across town to go to school, and everybody over there clear across the other way. They've actually done that. And what we have is a group of people that, when I say white America, I mean the minority people that have moved into the white American scene. It includes blacks and browns and Asians. You have that group, and then you have another group of people who have not moved into it. Now, in my case, I have a daughter who's very bright, and she happens to go to a school near our house, which is all kinds of minorities in it. She's very bright. She's 11 years old and reading at about, I don't know, about a 15 or 16-year-old level. But she's in a class where with other kids who come from homes where the parents never did anything but work in the fields or pick cotton or shovel cement and hang out in the ghettos or worse in the rural areas of the South. And these people have not read books. She's in a class with this kind of people, this kind of student. Well, children cannot learn. Someone like my daughter and many others like her, and there are blacks and Mexican Americans like her. Oh, she's Mexican American, of course. But they're in a class where 25 out of 35 kids are reading at a second and third grade level. And there's not much you can do about this. As you go into these people's homes, all during the 30s, their parents, there was no provision made for them. They were out in the fields working. They'd never had a chance to go to school. They never had any advantages. Now America pays the price for this. Now we don't know what to do. Now we've given the people a little bit of power. We've, thank God for the civil rights thing that has brought it about where there is minority voting power. And now we're going to have to pay the price for that. What we're going to do, I don't know. But one of the problems that I wanted to address myself to was the coming, and please, I'd sure like to have any hands if you have any comments on this at all, the coming of literally tens of thousands of teachers from the Midwest to California and going into teaching situations. Well, it just doesn't work. Now, there are many places in California where we have a white middle class type of community. Many. Now, these people from here coming from middle class white, they have no problem there going right in there and becoming fine teachers. But they have never been in contact with the closest they've come to a Mexican American is to see Leo Carrillo in the movies, where every time a little young girl walks by, his eyes bulge and he goes, "Ooh, senor, she is very pretty, I think," and everybody roars with laughter. Well, we are not like that. But this is the image that Hollywood and John Steinbeck has projected to the people. And when you have large groups of people like you do in the Midwest who've never come in contact with people like us, they just can't dream up what the real picture. They can't. They go by what they've been exposed to, which is that. So consequently, we have an awful lot of problems. Now, this gets kind of complicated. But I did some articles for the Los Angeles Times and the Newswire services on education in California. In some places, it was the only place where they'd been busing kids long enough to really test them and see what's happening with the busing. Now, first I want to say that busing may or may not bring the child's achievements up. But that is not the most important thing. And if you want to get back to that, I will later. But that certainly is not the most important thing, is teaching the child is 3 R's. But anyway, they took a survey in an area, and there are many areas in California where they have solid Mexican American. And in this area, they'd taken kids from, I forget, it was something like 1st through 4th grade or something, and they'd bust them into an all-Anglo school. and had them stay there for 2 or 3 years, and then they checked the results. Well, they found some very curious things. For one thing, minority people have been yakking for a long time that it's that a poor facility, a bad school in a rough neighborhood wasn't conducive to learning to kids, and I go along with that. The schools in the barrios and in the ghetto. Barrio, by the way, is simply the Mexican word for ghetto. It's where the Mexican people live. The barrios and the ghettos have always been in the worst sections of town. So they figured you put them in a pleasant physical surrounding, and this would improve their receptivity to knowledge. And I suppose that it had an effect. You can learn, you can study better under pleasant surroundings than you can under unpleasant surroundings. There's no doubt about that. But the funny thing showed up, and that is they took the kids out of the Mexican school in his district, they bused them across town to the nice white school, and they kind of integrated them. So maybe they'd have like 6 Mexican kids out of a class of maybe 25 or 30. And they just spread them around like that. Well, at the end of the first year, the child's achievement dropped, bang, way down, you know, and everyone couldn't understand why, because sociologists said, well, if you expose him to other kids who are achievement-oriented, it'll rub off on him, but it didn't. And at the end of the second year, there wasn't much significance, and they were about to give up, saying, well, what good has all this done? And then the third year, the scores started leveling off, and the fourth year, boom, a terrific upshoot in achievement level. And everybody was quite puzzled by this. And a woman working there, Dr. Mercer, her name is, she spent about $500,000 finding out why, and there's some of us could have told her for, well, $20, I think. That what happened was, getting back to the teacher again. Now, the teacher comes, most teachers are white, or they are black people who have moved into white America. And they go into a situation where they have all achievement-oriented kids that are learning like hell, all white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and they learn like crazy, because everything is geared to their background and to their place in society. So they put these kids in there, the Mexican kids, and the teacher suddenly sees she's had a good thing going, she can relate to the kids and everything, and all of a sudden here's 5 or 6 kids that don't relate at all. They're bashful, they don't pronounce the words right, they've gotten a slow start because they're bilingual, which incidentally, if you give a kid a little different curriculum, he shoots way ahead when he's bilingual, but we don't work our things like that. We you know, if you speak Spanish, you're handicapped and underprivileged. If you speak French, you're educated and elite, but if you speak Spanish, you're handicapped. Anyway, the teacher, they found, they tested both teacher and child in these situations, and they found that the teacher had a very negative reaction to having these kids come in her class, in her all white class. The teacher would admit that she thought it was going to slow down the class. They wouldn't admit to to having any out-and-out racist feelings, but they were given some questionnaires which pretty much tells the story. And so there's the child there. He's thrown into a situation where he has first the head of the class, who's kind of like a god, he gets negative vibrations from the head of the class, the teacher. This naturally also is reflected from the students, the non-Mexican students. So here you have a few kids in a class, and he's got negativity all around him. He's got criticism. He's got snickerings. The bell rings, and I know because I don't think many of you have read my book, but it's in here. It's a fiction book, but a lot of this happened to me. You get the snickerings. You bring food that you're used to eating, like tacos and tortillas, in your lunch, and people laugh. See? Well, it is impossible for a child to learn unless he knows that when he achieves something, he will have the approval of his peers and his instructor. If you don't have that, the child is not going to learn. And with all the negativity of the newness of the situation, both students and teacher never having been exposed to this element before, the child got nothing but negativity, and consequently, his achievement was low. But then, at the end of the third year, the funny thing started happening. And this is why I am for situations where different kinds of people are thrown in together. Funny things started happening. By the end of the third year, the students and the teachers suddenly realized that these little kids were human too. Suddenly started understanding a little bit. Suddenly started realizing when the little kid wanted to do something kind or nice,
If you don't have that, the child is not going to learn.
and with all the negativity of the newness of the situation, both students and teacher never having been exposed to this element before, the child got nothing but negativity, and consequently, his achievement was low. But then, at the end of the third year, the funny thing started happening. And this is why I am for situations where different kinds of people are thrown in together. Funny things started happening. By the end of the third year, the students and the teachers suddenly realized that these little kids were human too. Suddenly started understanding a little bit. Suddenly started realizing when the little kid wanted to do something kind or nice or bring something that he thought the teacher would like, but the teacher wouldn't because it was an unheard of thing perhaps, the teacher started realizing this and started being receptive. Now, the minute the teacher's attitude began to change, the class's attitude has changed. And the child suddenly found himself in a positive emotional as well as intellectual environment, and his achievement scores just shot way up. And as it does, when a normal kid is held back, once he does start to achieve, for a while he spurts way ahead of everybody else. And this happened. And it was a very strange phenomenon. These results of these tests have not, for some reason, I don't know, other than what I've done in the news wires, they have not been released or are put out and still are not available. For some reason, I don't know. One of these days I was going to look into it. Another thing about the educational system, you say, well, blacks are always saying, well, why don't you give us black teachers? And Mexicans saying, give us Mexican teachers, teachers that understand our kids. Well, that's good, except when you have a minority community where only a very few get up and go through the college, then it can be troublesome. Now, what is quite apt to happen is a bright Mexican girl works hard in grade school, she gets encouragement. She latches on to the encouragement. She goes through high school with good grades, gets a scholarship. Her folks usually can't afford to send her, so she goes on a scholarship. She knows how it is to work hard, to hold extra jobs. She literally works her ass off trying to get something that most Anglos are handed on a silver platter. And she finally gets her degree, and then she gets out and she gets her teaching credential. Okay, she's whipped the world. She's come from the barrio, which is pretty bad. The East Los Angeles it's the largest barrio outside of Mexico. She's worked her way from there clear on up into the high-class section of white America, you know. And then she gets her teaching credential, and the people say, "Oh, you're Mexican-American. We need you right back down there where you came from." Well, she worked all her life to get away from there, you know. She didn't want the tough streets, the broken sidewalks, the no street lights. She didn't want this, and here she's being pushed right back into this, right back where every time she looks at kids, she sees everything that she rejected and tried to fight and get away from. Naturally, she's not going to be the best suited teacher for that job. And this happens in case after case. I've met teachers who are extremely unhappy. Another reason that the education is so bad in the barrio is in the barrio as in the ghetto, nobody really wants to work there. Number one, it's tough. Number two, whites are usually afraid of blacks and Mexicans because they don't understand them. Number three, the schools are usually, the minority people wind up in the old town where the whites moved out a long time ago. And so it's usually an old place. So nobody wants to work there. So consequently, who do you get to work there? In any system that has reward, where effort is reward, you have rewards. And so a teacher works hard, and he can pretty much, not all the time, but he'll have some influence as to where he will end up teaching in a large school system such as they have around Los Angeles. If a teacher fouls up, a troublemaker, bad teacher, you got to punish him somewhere. You don't send him to Beverly Hills to teach, which is upper class. You send him back to the barrio in the ghetto. Now, I've seen this time and time again happen. Teachers are assigned to the minority community as a disciplinary measure. And there just doesn't seem to be any way of getting around this, because I've had teachers and school superintendents tell me, well, what do you want us to do with the bad teachers? You know? What can you do? If you send the bad teachers to where the white people, the high-class white schools there, that's where the parents really take an interest in it. And they'll go right to the principal and say, look, we're going to get you fired if you don't get him out of there. So he gets him out of there. See? But the poor little Mexican and the poor black woman from Alabama that never went past the second grade, she's not going to go up and challenge that principal's decision or the superintendent's decision at putting the bad teachers in the ghetto. So, to make a long story short, all these things combined, as I said before, we've got problems on our hands, the minority problems that I do not see any way that we're going to solve. We've created millions of people who do not and are not going to fit in to the American scheme of things. Now, all these kids I'm talking about, right now, there are thousands of people that are running around madly in California trying to straighten out the school system. But as fast as one problem gets whipped, you have another problem. In the meantime, all these kids, now this has been going on for what, 10 years, that people have suddenly awakened to the fact, at least since Watch, which was what, 8 years ago, you know, the people have awakened to the fact that we have something terrible has happened to America. See? In the meantime, all these kids are growing up, going through high school, they're making demands and getting through colleges, and they're not fitting. Somebody had their hand up over here. Yes, ma'am. Can you stand up and talk louder, please, so everybody can hear you?
Are there any programs in your area of California that use the bilingual approach, where they teach Spanish as the first language and English as the second?
Yeah, it's called the ESL program. She asked if there's places where they speak, let the kids speak Spanish. It's called ESL, English as a Second Language. And how this is something that's fairly new, and how effective it is, I don't know. And besides that isn't going to really solve the problem anyway. I mean, if you teach the kid all in English and Spanish, in English or Spanish, regardless. That isn't going to solve the problem that he's going to face, but it's a tremendous step in the right direction towards getting the kids so he's not failure-oriented from right off. Yes, sir.
Sir, when they were busing minorities in California, children across town to school, in what grades or for how long did they bus them? Because from where I'm from, St. Paul, Minnesota, there was a conclusion to the problem that sure they bused the blacks across town to the better white schools during grade school, during junior high, and then they shipped them back to the bad part of town, or whatever you want to call it, for high school. And this, all the good that they did for the first few years was, turned all the way around. Is this what happened in California?
Well, for one thing, we're still busing like mad there. And as I say, the busing does a lot more than, than what it was originally designed to do. Where I live, as I said before, the minorities always wind up in the old town, where you don't have minorities, you find the poor people wind up in the old town, and the minority equals poor people. So that's the explanation for that. But in the poor end of town, you have lousy schools. We have some schools in the town I live in where the last earthquake we had, fortunately 2 years before, someone had insisted the kids move out of the main building and hold their school in tents. And they were been doing this for 2 years, and this was right in the heart of the black area. And that was very fortunate because they could have all been killed in the last earthquake. But anyway, so here's what happens. You got all in the normal course of things, the way our system works, all the blacks wind up in the bad areas, all the nice new schools, and we have some beauties, are way over in the white areas. Okay? So all of a sudden the Supreme Court comes along and says, we ain't going to do this no more. We're going to bus them. Okay, well, here's the first thing that happens, is poor little Johnny, who's raised by his, lawyer, white father and everything, he's bused all the way across, and he has to go to school in a building that might fall down on him any time. Well, Johnny's father and his mother aren't going to put up with that. They come over there and they say, look, we don't want our kids going to a school like that, where there's no grass, there's no this, half the windows are broken all the time, and the place is a death trap in many ways, and the white folks get things done about it that the black folks and the Mexican Americans never could get done. Because they don't have a voice and because people don't like them, because nobody listens to them. Go ahead.
Would it help if they send them through high school?
Well, I think that there is a lot of that being done.
Has there been evidence that this helps?
Helps what?
Well, it helps alleviate a small part of the problem.
Well, I think that...
To make you understand, see, I lived in the suburbs, went to a parochial school in the center of the city. And see, I myself, lived in that environment and knew and missed most of what was going on all these years. And now that I live in Iowa, I can look back, and every time I go home, I see these problems, and they stick out at me like a sore thumb.
Mm-hmm.
But myself, I don't have many facts still, and I'm quite...
Yeah. Well, you asked if it would help if they continued it through high school, and it is being continued. Pasadena is broken up where the people in one area have to go to school way somewhere else, and it's all broken up, and it's been undoubtedly for the best of everybody. Although the conservative type of white American doesn't like it. The conservative type white American doesn't like to face any of these problems. What they all ought to do is come to Iowa. Where you don't have the problems, though. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
I just wondered, are you feeling with the teacher education or urban education program in the United States? If so, do you see this as a hard solution to the problem?
Yeah, I think everybody heard her. Yeah, I think teacher training can be a tremendously valuable thing. But teacher training can be such a shock. I did a story for the Newswires on a program at a place called Johnston College, which is on the University of Redlands, where they have a course for people who are going into teaching. And they've done this in other places too, but this is one of the first ones that did it. They take girls just like you, and they'd say, okay, part of your curriculum this semester is you go home and you pack your suitcase, and we're sending you to a little Mexican town out in the desert where everybody works on the railroad, and we'll pay your way there. We'll pay the family $10 a week, and you're going to live in the back bedroom with 3 Mexican kids. That's part of your class. And then they're required to keep a daily journal, you know, and then when the journal comes in, they start comparing. And these things, I went through them, and I'm telling you, it was absolutely astounding. One girl was both her parents were successful lawyers. They had a huge swimming pool, half as big as this whole auditorium, in a very swank neighborhood on the beach. And she'd never been around anything but the upper middle class, and she wanted to be a teacher. You know, you got these, excuse the term, but what we call white-ass liberals running around here, that they're going to change the world. And by the way, thank God for the white liberals. In some ways, they've really done a tremendous amount. But anyway, they took her and they sent her out to one of these places out in the desert in a little Mexican community, and there are thousands of them. And things happen like the kids ditch school because they have to help their father in the fields. The mother was home when her baby came. There was no telephone and she couldn't get a doctor, so they came home, found her on the floor and the baby dead between her legs. These sort of things. This girl saw these things, and she said, "This can't be America." Because everywhere that she'd gone to school, they told her that these things didn't have. They told her we were the healthiest, we have the best doctors, we have the best system. Everybody can be president. Anybody that works hard can get ahead. And she saw that the hardest working people in the country are the worst off. You know, and this is in direct conflict to our Puritanic philosophy. It says if you work hard, you'll get ahead. You know, and it's not true. And so that was just one little thing, and it worked both ways too. They took one girl whose journal I read was just told only that she was going to spend 6 weeks or whatever it was with a Japanese family, and so she went and she boned up on her Japanese, you know, and she was, and then they took her to the Japanese family, and this is what makes the program valid. This is what I'm going to tell you. And here they drives into a big, beautiful place here. The fellow has Mexican gardeners, Japanese with Mexican gardeners, and white servants, you know, and the mother is a trim Japanese figure. She expected the mother to come out and say, "Oh, so sorry," you know, and instead there's a mini-skirted mother who organizes PTAs and this sort of thing, and who has a master's degree in something or other. And she was astounded. Well, this too is part of America, you see. And not only the other part, and she found out this Japanese family was Protestant, and she went to church with them and found out that they give Methodist Protestant sermons in Japanese. Now this, as I say, this sort of thing makes that type of thing relevant, you know, because it is all mixed up. But anyway, to get back to what the original question was, yes, teacher training can be a tremendous help if you do these things, and if the prospective teacher is willing to learn what the problems are. But in most cases, they want to get their teaching credential, they want to get settled in a job, and teaching is a pretty soft job in some ways, depending on where you teach. And you get settled down and you make minimum of what, $10,000 a year anyway. And yeah, you do in California. A $10,000 a year teaching job is not a good job by any means. And, you know, you can get settled down and get your pool built and have your barbecues and start building the circle of friends that you want, and you're living Americanism. That's what most people want out of the American dream. When I said 10,000, did you think that was high or low? No, it's not. At the high school and college level, that's about beginning salaries. I know my wife's a teacher, so I happen to know. Someone, pardon?
That's what he's talking about, California.
In California, yeah. Someone else had their hand up over here. Yes, ma'am. Could you stand up and talk loud so everybody can hear you?
I really question all our priorities this year. It seems like we're talking about maybe the base problems rather than getting at the heart of the problem. And like you talk about busing, I'm not really sure whether I agree with it so wholeheartedly. It seems to me rather than spending all the money to bus kids back and forth, you should put it into the school system, to improve the school system. And personally, I don't feel that we put enough money in education as it is, considering how much we value it and how high we rate it. And it just seems that
Well, I have to agree with you, but you're being idealistic. When you say we should quit the busing and pour that money into the schools, you're absolutely right. But there is no such thing in a racist society as separate and equal. And this is what the courts have realized. You know, the judges that handed down all these decisions, they knew, boy, you can pour, and it's been done, the people so anxious to keep the blacks or the Mexicans in one area, they'll say, look, give them $1 million. See? And it still doesn't work, because there is no such thing as separate and equal. And the only way that you can get equality is to mix them up and have Whitey going over there and George Washington Jackson going over into the high-class section. Then the things will level out because of human nature. That's the only way you can do it.
Why does that necessarily mean like separate or equal? This seems to me that we can improve the school system, and I still think there can be integration. I really do.
Well, busing is integration.
We're trying to put the kids in trying to use busing to solve the problem. I wonder if that's really getting at the heart of the problem.
Well, it certainly is not the ideal way to solve. Busing is certainly not the ideal way to solve the problem, but it's the only realistic one that anybody's been able to come up with, because it's so nice to be able to say, well, we're all going to be equal and we'll make their schools better and we'll live over here, and it just doesn't work. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to get away from general education.
Why?
I'd like to hear you speak more specifically about the culture and history of the Mexican Americans that the Chicano movement is trying to instill in
All righty. We'll get to that pretty soon. Right now, we seem to have touched on some areas that are of great interest to many people. Yes, ma'am.
May I say something?
Could you stand up and talk loud? So,
Well, I believe that in Iowa, we also have the same problem, specifically with the Chicanos and the Spanish Americans. Mason City has an enormous Chicano population, and Esterville, as a city that I can cite as a very good example, there's very bad things that happen here with the migrant workers and with the Chicanos, and these people are politically involved, and they're completely ignored. The white-ass Iowa liberals completely ignore them. You can pay to have articles published in the Des Moines Register. You can stand and holler and shout, and nobody reads them. They said that even if it's on the first page, they've had, particularly with the migrant labor people here, they've had a lot of publicity trying to open up the eyes of people like who are opposed to busing, and busing is just another step up, you see. You know, there's so many things that people can't feel and understand unless you live that way, that you can say, well, busing is not the answer. But what I'm trying to say is that it's a start, and it might be a very minor start to the Mexican and the Spanish Americans or to the black people, you know, but it's a major downfall to white liberal-ass Americans. They think that the answer is to just pour money into a place, but money doesn't buy everything. You know, you have to have the understanding and the knowledge of all the people, and particularly the white-ass liberal Americans, to understand that there's more to it than just money.
well, you're absolutely right. But as this here, and I certainly don't mean to be offensive, but right here where we are today is a mecca of people who have not been exposed to the problems. How do you propose to ever expose people to this unless you have something like a busing program? See? Now, it won't work here because there's nobody to bus, I understand. But,
Well, I think though that 300 Chicanos in a city as small as Mason City is a very large population, and I think that you're finding more Mexican Americans coming into the Midwest area because of the rural and of course the agrarian type.
mhm.
They can find work, but these people are housed and treated, and they have the most demeaning positions.
That's right.
And then not only that, but with the Indians also
Mm.
in Iowa. Just recently, there was a lady in southwest Iowa who was really going through a hell, and nobody, well, you heard about it maybe 2 or 3 times on the radio in the course of a week, but it wasn't all important, and nobody paid too much attention to it, so it's ignored.
Mm.
And it is ignored.
Yeah, that's very
All over,
true.
not just, you know,
Mm.
in Iowa.
Someone right back there, you, miss. Can you stand up and talk louder? I can't hear you.
Down in Texas, it's 60% Mexican American, El Paso, you know, Lewis Paso. And, during the time I've been up here, instead of busing, they have, improved the schools in the Chicano areas. They have this year switched teachers around. I've watched, and every summer I work in a school here, the free swimming lessons. It's a public school, it's through the city, under Southwest Run, we do free swimming lessons to the children, mainly Mexican Americans. And I have watched this school in a largely Mexican American area grow every year with Anglo, because the school in that area has improved so much, Anglos are moving back into the area. They're not moving out. We have not bused in El Paso. We have improved the school by channeling our money. I was really down on the city when I came up here. Just watching it, and my mother teaches there. I've really been happy with it. We haven't bused. We haven't
Mm.
had
Yeah, you
channeling money there.
no, that's,
It's a great problem through misunderstanding, because I think the big problem here is understanding the culture.
well, sure it is. You say the Anglos are moving back because, well, maybe they don't know they'd be happier with their own kind. Mr. Lowry had his hand up.
Well, I just wanted to ask why you always say, Chicano always says white America. It's a very minor thing. Always puzzles me. Why you say white America, I assume you're a white guy.
Well, Mr. Lowry commented on my use of the word white, using it not to include Mexican Americans. And this is something that's come about fairly recently, but the reason it came about is because the problem was never looked squarely in the eye. I was raised, and gee, I wish that you people could read my book, because I put these things in it, I think, so glaringly, that the Mexican people kind of got along halfway not being black and halfway not being white. And when you say, well, what are you? When we were kids, we'd lower our head and would mumble something about Spanish, and if we had light skin, would say we're mostly Portuguese or something like that. And then along came the awareness, several years after the black awareness happened, where we said, look, by God, we got nothing to hang our heads just because Leo Carrillo and a few fools like that did this. No, we are proud to be Mexican, and our heritage, many of us, is primarily Indian. Incidentally, myself and my daughter, who's as blonde as the blondest girl in here, just got a check for about $1,000 the other day of the government owed us for taking our land away 100 years ago. So, but anyway, the Indians are certainly not the Caucasian race. And the Mexican supposedly is half Mexican, is half Mexican Indian, which is non-Caucasian, and half Spanish, which is European. And by American standards anyway, if you've got one drop of non-Caucasian blood, you're all it, buddy. You ain't white no more. And so we have come along, and we don't, now people always ask me that, and I know you didn't ask it this way. They'll say, well, you're white too. And what they're really saying is don't lower yourself by calling yourself not white. And we don't feel that way. I know you didn't mean it that way, but so many people do, you know. They'll say, what do you mean? Come on, you're with us, you know. You're way up there, right near the top. You're white too. And we want to say, well, I can't say what we want to say to that. But we had to have something that was ourself. The lady here asked to get back to Chicano history and culture, and I will very shortly, touching on this sort of thing, because I think you'll be surprised what the history and culture is. Someone else had their hand up. Yes, ma'am. Louder and stand up and talk loud. Can you stand up?
It's not the color, but there's really not been a
righty, we will. And the lady was just remarking, for those of you who didn't hear, it's really not the culture, but, I mean, really not the color, but the culture. But the way things have turned out in this country, the culture and the color follow pretty much parallel lines. Not always, but pretty much parallel. I want to tell you something funny. A friend of mine, a newspaper reporter, came back from Japan, and he was telling me about talking to a Japanese whom he described as a very typical Japanese. He smokes his cigarette out like this. How is it they do? Some funny way, I don't know. But he was smoking like that, however it was, and holding a cigarette. And of course, it's known that the Japanese have treated the Koreans like dirt. You know, the Koreans are the menial help in the Japanese Empire, and have always looked down on them terrifically. And this Japanese, a very enlightened Japanese man, he said, "Why is it that you Americans," the way it was told to me was in Japanese dialect, which I can't do, he said, "Why is it that you Americans treat the blacks as unequal?" You know? And so this American reporter, he says, "Well," he says, no, the Japanese says, "Everybody knows that the blacks and whites are equal. Why is it you treat them so unequally?" And the American said, "Well," he says, "why is it that you Japanese treat the Koreans as inferiors?" And the Japanese says, "Yes, but that's different. Everybody knows the Koreans are inferior." You see? So somebody had a hand raised over here. No? You did, sir, before.
Well, I suppose it in a sense goes along with what the person back here asked you to do. In addition to talking more about the culture and the history, I'd like you also to talk about the politics of the great pickers' strike and the lettuce boycott, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this seems to be what is, these things have really brought the Chicano into the forefront of the news over the last 8-10 years, and perhaps a little less than that. And I think that you've left out, there's a tremendous gap there. I mean, if anything has given the Chicano nation pride, it's been the tremendous success of those strikes and the ongoing battle to achieve more success. And I'd like you to put that in.
All righty. If there's no more questions on what we've touched on, I'll go on. First off, I always get in trouble